Next talk is that of Peter Arkadiev, and Peter will speak about a very interesting matter, actually, from resultative to passive, a view from Northwest Caucasian.
Thank you. So, I'm not using the PowerPoint, and while the handout is being distributed, I will start by introducing the problem and languages. So, Northwest Caucasian languages, like basically North Caucasian languages in general, are believed to lack passive constructions whatsoever, and this is reflected in both in classic typological words like Klimov's and Alexeyev's Typologia Kavkazskих and the standard reference like Waltz. However, I will present some evidence tentatively suggesting that there is some kind of passive-like constructions in these languages developing from resultative constructions. And this is interesting in particular because this sort of development is something fairly well known from more or less trivial European languages like Baltic and Slavic and Germanic. So just to remind you, there are some classic definitions and observations on resultative, passive, and their connections mainly from Nedyalkov and Yakhantov's classic verb. So resultative is a verb form that expresses a state implying a previous event, and in particular I will be focusing on what is called objective or P-oriented resultative, that is a resultative where the underlying subject of the state is co-referential with the underlying object or patient of the preceding action. So like the door is opened, whereas the passive, as Nedyalkov and Yakhantov again define it, are verb forms of constructions which indicate that a surface subject doesn't encode the agent, and the passive, they say, involves a change in the athesis but no change in the notational meaning. Therefore, basically, by the passive, so to say, sensu stricto, they understand the actional passive only, not the statal passive. So the statal passive is more or less synonymous with objective resultative, whereas actional passive is something which denotes the same situation as the basic transitive clause, with all agentive and dynamic components of the situation expressed, but with the grammatical roles of the participant redistributed. And again, it is very well known that resultative based on transitive verbs, the objective resultative and the passive are related both in terms of diathesis and in terms of diachronic origins of the passive, which is frequently, at least very well known based on resultatives. And I will argue that Northwest Caucasian languages present another yet undocumented case of such a development. So, very briefly about the Northwest Caucasian languages. This is one of the three indigenous language families of the Caucasus with three branches: Abkhaz, Abaza, Circassian, and the extinct Ubykh. And I will present evidence from the both living branches, mainly from the Bjeduk dialect of Circassian, the Kuban dialect of Kabardyan, and the Tapanta dialect of Abaza. And to be honest, 2 years ago I spoke about more or less the same topic only on the basis of Circassian, and here I have new data from Abaza, and this partly corroborates my previous findings and partly supplements them by another yet quite interesting and typologically revealing, as I hope to argue instance of such a development. And all my data comes from fieldwork conducted from 2014 to 2018. So the major relevant typological features of the Northwest Caucasian languages are summarized on pages from the bottom of page 1 until page 3. So most importantly, they are polysynthetic and encode all the argument structure of the clause on the main verb by means of pronominal prefixes, as well as possess a large number of various affixal means to express aspect, tense, modality, and other sorts of meanings. The general schema of the Northwest Caucasian verbal complex is given in table 1 on the top of page 2. Just for your orientation, there are a couple of textual examples showing fairly complex verbal forms. In terms of valency-related operations, these languages are very well known for having rich systems of valency increasing devices such as causatives, applicatives, etc., but generally very poor in valency decreasing operations. Importantly, these languages are morphologically and at least partly syntactically ergative. In all these languages, this is manifested in pronominal marking on verbs, which is shown in table 2, and there are other examples in 3. I'm not going to discuss it in any detail, just please keep it in mind. And Circassian languages also have ergatively based case marking. And in addition to the core cases, which we call the absolutive and the oblique is a general case for everything, for all arguments which are not absolutive, ergatives, and indirect objects alike. Both branches also have polyfunctional instrumental case marking a variety of non-cross-reference, non-core arguments, as shown in 5 and 6, and this will become important later when we will discuss passive-like constructions. And while the normal way of backgrounding the agent of the event is simply by means of a generic or non-referential third-person plural. So if you don't know the agent and don't want to say anything about it, just use the regular transitive verb with a third-person plural prefix, and it's okay. So like in 7 from West Circassian and 8 from Abaza. And that could be all, but there are further ways of backgrounding the agent which are relevant for our purposes. And last but not least, these languages have fairly complex tense systems, and in particular in Abkhaz and Abaza there is a morphological distinction between static and dynamic verbs manifested in the affixes used to encode mostly present and past tenses, and this will become important immediately when I will turn to resultatives. In both Circassian and Abaza, resultatives are static predicates derived from dynamic verbs, and the common characteristic feature is that they lack the ergative agent prefix. Otherwise, they are not exactly the same in two branches, in particular because in Circassian, resultatives always contain the regular past perfective or preterite tense marker, like in 9. So in 9, tapsincho trejar is a transitive verb with the ergative agent, meaning roasted. We quickly roasted the meat, and the final marker is the past tense marker, the perfective past tense marker. However, in the B example, we see the resultative jar, rejare, and here there is no agent marker, 1, and 2, the very same past tense marker, re, the final vowel can sometimes be omitted, but this is a more phonological process. No longer denotes past tense, it denotes, it's a part of the resultative construction. By contrast, in Abaza, there isn't any dedicated or, any sort of overt marking of the resultative, except that it's a transitive verb which lacks the ergative prefix, and it inflects like a static verb. So in 10a, abhuspa agir alted, the girl opened the door, we see a transitive verb with the ergative prefix l before the root and the declarative aorist ending in de, whereas in 10b, ashitib, we see the same root, but there isn't any agent marker there, and the tense marker b tells us that this is a static present tense. Importantly, due to the lack of any dedicated morphology, it is virtually impossible to automatically extract resultatives from any kind of corpora, which is very regretful, and therefore most of the examples below are elicited. So, in the remaining 10 minutes I have to tell quite a lot of things. Well,
You can take 5 more minutes.
yeah, probably. Well, very briefly, in the Circassian resultatives, as I have said, they contain the preterite marker. However, this preterite suffix doesn't have past time reference. First, resultatives denote situations simultaneous to the speech time when they simply have this marker re or a, as in Kabadian. As in examples 13 and 14 at the bottom of page 4, and and as in example 12. And if you need to express non-present reference like past or future, then you simply attach the respective tense marker to the resultative form. It looks like it is a tense marker, like another past marker or a future marker attached to the past marker. However, it can be argued that this marker is simply resultative and not past anymore, as shown in example 13 and 14. And resultative predicates in Circassian may attach certain aspectual modal affixes, as shown in 15 and 16, which can never attach to the same marker when it functions as the past tense. So it can be argued that if you like, that the same marker re occupies different structural positions when it functions as a resultative and as the perfective past. Anyway, this is not the main point of my talk. So now let's look what happens when the resultative starts behaving as a passive and how this can be diagnosed. So a canonical resultative denotes a state, and so it is supposed to suppress the agentive dynamic components of the basic situation, and this can be tested by the compatibility or incompatibility of the resultative with certain expressions, such as adverbials, whose interpretation depends on such components. So, for instance, in English, it is argued that it's possible to say the door has been closed quickly, or the door has been closed with purpose, showing the passive. However, it's not possible to say things like the door is closed quickly or the door is closed on purpose, because is closed is what is called adjectival passive or resultative. However, when I started testing this with the native speakers of Circassian and Abazar, it quickly turned out that they in fact allow the resultative to combine with a whole array of expressions referring to the dynamic phases of the situation, and the only dialect for which I have consistent negative replies is the Tamigor dialect of West Circassian. However, I have consulted only one native speaker, who is incidentally a member of the staff of this institute, so I don't really think that her judgments are particularly reliable. Anyway, table 5 shows more or less shows the distribution of various adverbial expressions, and there are examples from Jedouh, Kuban, and Abazar showing each of the cells of the table. So what is important is like it's examples like 19, such for instance the letter was written in 15 minutes. It's expressions like in 15 minutes refer to the duration of the event, not to the duration of the state. So it's if they are compatible with a particular form, this means that this form does not denote only the state. And likewise, examples like, for instance, 24, the dishes were washed willingly. Likewise, since willingly refers to the agentive component of a situation, to the agent's intentions, this means that the verbal form, the predicate, can also refer to the agentive component, that it's not 100% suppressed or grounded. And finally, probably most importantly for the passive analysis, at least Jedouh and Abazar allow to express the agent of the event by means of the instrumental phrase. So in 26 from Jedouh, this book was written by a famous writer, or 27 from Abazar, the keys have been literally are found by some guy. The native speakers allowed to use the resultative with the overt agent phrase. So a note of caveat is that neither of these contexts trigger an anonymous reaction of my consultants. So there are many cases where native speakers say that one native speaker says that for one particular example that this is okay, and another native speaker says that this example is bad, and the first native speaker says the other example is bad, even though it looks like pretty the same as the example he or she approved of previously. However, it is the results are more or less robust. It is not the case that only one of 7 consultants agreed reluctantly to admit this or that example. It's not the case. All of these examples have been confirmed by at least 2 or 3 native speakers, and So these patterns do not seem to be entirely accidental. So the second interesting case comes from Abaza only, and yes, I'm afraid I'll have to take some more minutes. So Abaza is more intricate than Caucasian in that, in addition to the passive-like uses of the plain resultative, which are not always attested by speakers, Abaza features a construction for which these diagnostic contexts actually work better, not 100% okay, but better. And this construction is the inceptive derivate of the resultative. The inceptive is formed by the suffix cha. The inceptive is a dynamic predicate, so but it can be seen that it is derived from the resultative because it still lacks the agent prefix, and it's not possible to attach the inceptive to a regular verb. The inceptive attaches to what can be called nouns or adjectives and to stative verbs in these languages, but not to dynamic verbs. So it is clear that the inceptive is based on the resultative, and actually my consultants, regardless of whether they accept or reject the passive-like uses of the plain resultative, tend to accept the inceptive in context referring to the dynamic aspects of the situation, including the reference to the agent. So like in example 36, the dishes were washed by the children, where the inceptive is okay, whereas the plain resultative is not always okay, and even example 36 with the Abaza style question formation targeting the demoted agent. So what kind of conclusions can be drawn from this data? Well, first of all, the two paths of development from the objective resultative, the so-called statal passive, to actional passive, which I have shown above for Northwest Caucasian languages, that is the extension of the resultative proper without any sort of extra marking, and what can be called a dynamicization of the resultative by an inceptive operator, certainly find immediate parallels in the European languages such as German, Baltic, and Slavic, which have been amply described in the literature. So, on the one hand, in such languages as Russian and Lithuanian, constructions with the auxiliary be and the passive past participle are systematically ambiguous between resultative and actional passive, as shown in 38 for Russian and 39 for Lithuanian. And please pay attention to example 39 because its translations will figure below. By contrast, in Polish, Latvian, and German, the distinction between the resultative and the actional passive is formally marked by the choice of the stative versus inceptive auxiliary, which is best known for German, the distinction between Zustandspassiv and Vorgangspassiv. Thank you. Like gestern noch war doch ein Shit angebracht, which is the resultative, and gestern noch wurde dort ein Shit angebracht, which is the actual passive. And more or less the same works for Latvian with bija aizslēgta, as the door was locked, and tika aizslēgta, as the door became locked, has been locked by someone, or Polish with the auxiliaries jest and być and zostać, and Interestingly and predictably, in this particular context, Abaza shows a fully parallel distinction between the plain resultative and the inceptive, as in for the trees. So H2, the door is open, but I don't know when it was opened. Yantra has the inceptive marker, and it's not possible to substitute the inceptive by the plain resultative. Unfortunately, I don't have the parallel example for any Circassian variety, but I have a suspicion that they would rather use the third person plural agent transitive construction rather than any sort of resultative. Anyway, I will skip possibly highly relevant passage about German and come to the very conclusions. So, very briefly, the extension of the Northwest Caucasian resultative into the passive domain might have to do with the influence from Russian. However, I actually don't know how this can be proved or rejected, but it's an obvious idea, but probably it's not yet possible to provide conclusive evidence for this. However, anyway, I think that this material is theoretically and typologically relevant because it offers a window into the initial stages of the transition between the resultative proper and the passive, as well as into the microvariation which can be attested in this domain. And also it shows the role of optional modifiers which can diagnose this process, which is often manifested mainly in semantic extensions rather than in any clearly visible morphosyntactic changes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So we've got about 3 minutes for questions.
Yes, it is remarkable that in 36 and 37 your agents are an instrumental and not, for example, an ergative. Would you analyze them as arguments or just some agents expressing a more general, maybe a semantic role of cause or something?
Well, I think it's not remarkable that they are not in the ergative because they can't be in the ergative, since in order to be in the ergative in the oblique case, in Abaza there isn't any case anyway, but regardless, in order to be in the core case, the argument has to be cross-referenced on the verb, and this is not possible with the resultative or its derivatives anyway. Technically, I would not analyze them as arguments, because if the argument versus adjunct distinction for these languages is defined, then it's defined on the basis of cross-reference. So things which are not cross-referenced on the verb are not arguments. And certainly it's possible to omit the instrumental phrase if it's not necessary, so to say. So I would argue that they are adjuncts.
Yes, and that is connected to my second question. So, as for non-accusative languages, we don't know towards which goal those resultative construction may evolve. But there, what are your predictions?
Linguistics doesn't have predictive power, you know.
So if they move towards some actual passive construction. So, will they maybe just evolve in a regular transitive clause and eventually acquire ergative cross-reference? What are the typological predictions? Because
I don't see myself in a position to answer this sort of question.
Okay. So it's not entirely clear.
Anyway, I beg your pardon. Even if these constructions evolve into a sort of a regularly used passive, I don't see any reasons whatsoever for them to further develop into anything else. It's unless something happens and ergative morphology of these languages somehow breaks down, but there doesn't seem to be any prerequisites for it whatsoever, and there are plenty of languages which are both morphologically ergative and have passives, so I don't see any point in...
It's an agent, instrumental even.
Yeah, so
I'm afraid we've got only time for a very, very small question.
Yes,
and it was maybe Asa, because she wanted to ask you before.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the interesting talk. I'm very curious about the point you made at the end of the talk, that this might be influenced from Russian. And I was wondering if you can elaborate how such influence could occur when we talk about a syntactic construction, I guess, or morphosyntactic construction.
Well, I'm not sure I have time for it, but since in Russian the resultative and the passive look more or less the same, and differ in their semantics and combinatorial possibilities, it could be the case that the native speakers of these languages, who are all fluent in Russian, and have some exposure and have plenty of exposure to Russian text, especially Russian official text where the passive is used, they know that their own resultative corresponds to the Russian resultative, but they also know that the Russian resultative can also be used as the passive, and hence they could, the mechanism, this is just a simple mechanism of pattern borrowing, where they extend their own native construction on the basis of the constructions from their second language. However, this doesn't seem to work very well for the Abazar inceptive based resultative, and anyway, I think that this sort of argument can only be made on the basis of extensive corpus data, and this is yet not really accessible.
Okay, so
thank
thank
you.
you